Hello and greetings, everyone. My name is Judd Hendricks, and I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Paths to Peace, and I want to welcome you to our Evolutionaries of the Soul. This is a every week Wednesday lunch program where we interview and talk with religious and spiritual leaders from across our community. And I'm really excited today to have Reverend Mary Alice Birdwhistell. She's the new pastor at Highland Baptist Church, which many of you may know. Highland has been a big supporter of interfaith work across our city. And so we're really excited, Mary Alice, to have you on and to have some conversation with you. The idea with Evolutionaries of the Soul is we just have a chance to get to know a little bit better the stories of those who are leading in our community to help us be a more awake and loving and compassionate community. So Mary Alice, really excited to have you on today. For those of you that are joining us on Zoom, welcome. I'm glad you all decided to come and be a part of the conversation. There will be a chance later on for you to ask some questions as we begin. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, welcome. Good to have you there. You're also welcome to include a comment or a question in the chat box if you are interested in doing that, and we'll bring your comment and question into the conversation as we go. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for having lunch today with us virtually. And Mary Alice, I was telling you earlier that when we were able to sit down and actually do face-to-face lunch, lunch is on me. So I'll look forward to that time when we can do that face-to-face. So Mary Alice, welcome to Louisville. Welcome to Highland Baptist. And yeah, if you would just kind of jump in and tell us a little of your story and, some time frame and, 3 to 5 minutes. What life brought you to us? Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. And I will say, Judd and IPP are some of the very first folks from the community who reached out and welcomed me to Highland and invited me to hit the ground running with them. And I think it was the week of the announcement about the Breonna Taylor case that Judd invited me to participate in an interfaith prayer vigil, and just really appreciated being welcomed and invited into that space. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and hopefully face to face and not over a Zoom screen one day soon. Yeah, a bit about my story. So I am a Kentucky girl. Kentucky is home. I grew up in Lawrenceburg, just down the road, a little town right next to Frankfort. Grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and grew up in a wonderful church that taught me so many things about knowing and following Jesus, about loving God and loving others and what that looks like. But also grew up in a context where I didn't really see a lot of women in leadership. And so that's a big part of my story, is really coming to envision myself in a role that I hadn't seen many women do. But that's been a big journey for me. I went to Georgetown College, majored in English. I knew that whatever I was going to do in life, I loved words and telling stories and writing and communicating, and wanted that to be part of it. And Georgetown was just a really wonderful space where I was formed in so many ways into the person I am today. And since being back in Kentucky, I've met a lot of great Georgetown folks too. So that's been exciting. After Georgetown, I actually moved to Waco, Texas. Never thought I would move to Texas, but I was looking at seminaries, and the seminary at Baylor kind of came on my radar. And I thought, well, I'll just go check it out, but I'm not going to move to Texas. That's really far away. But visited and just fell in love with it and thought I could really see myself here. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll be in Texas for 3 or 4 years. And that turned into 11. Started working at a church there, Calvary Baptist Church in Waco. And the people at Calvary were just incredible. And I realized that affirming women in ministerial roles was just a big part of Calvary's story. They had actually called the first female pastor of a Baptist church in the state of Texas back in the 90s. Her name was Julie Pennington Russell. There were picketers on her first Sunday. By the time I got to Calvary, Julie was no longer there, but she had left her fingerprints in so many ways. And so the church just wrapped their arms around me and supported me as a young woman in ministry. And finally, I realized, okay, whether or not I can ever see myself in this role, this is a church that they see me as a pastor. And I feel like that was just a gift that they gave me and that I began to live out there. So I was children's minister, and then I became associate pastor, and then I was called as pastor. And just, it was a really great community. But Kentucky's home, and I always had this itch to be back, to be closer to family, and Highland Baptist Church came knocking. I guess it's about a year and a half ago now. And Highland, I've known about Highland for years. They're doing just incredible work in the city and are on the front lines of a lot of justice issues. And I thought, wow, I wonder what it would be like to be part of a community of faith like that. And actually, a year ago this weekend, I came to Highland to visit with the staff, to see the church, to check it out. I gave them my yes. We were ready to move forward with this process of calling me as pastor. And the very next day is when COVID was declared a pandemic and the world just started shutting down. And so, like many of you, I think I'm remembering right now, okay, where was I? What was I doing this time last year? And this is where I was. So it's neat to be full circle and to be here now. So I moved to Louisville in July, August of 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and the church has welcomed me in every way they know how to do in the midst of a pandemic. And it's been a really incredible community and place to be. And I'm excited to getting to know people better and face to face and really getting more involved in the city, but already feel at home.
Thanks, Mary Alice. I want to go back to the women in ministry aspect
Yeah.
of Baptist life. That's always pretty rich. And actually, my mom's on the call. And so a deep bow to Leela. She's been one of the forefront leaders in women in ministry work. And so that theme has been really important in my own journey. I grew up Southern Baptist, was ordained Presbyterian, but so I have deep roots in these theological themes involved in Baptist life. Talk a little bit more about that sense of calling as a woman and some of the challenges and hurdles to that in Baptist life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's see, where do I begin? You know, even in more progressive Baptist life, where our churches say, yeah, we support women in ministry, we have female deacons or that kind of thing, you still don't often see female pastors. So even in CBF life, the latest study is that there are only 6.5% of CBF churches have female pastors. Like we have so much work to do there. So, you know, I grew up in a context where I didn't see women preach. I didn't see women pray from the pulpit. I mean, women didn't even take up the offering or give out the little visitor cards in worship. And I think I'm still realizing that the seeds that were planted in me as a young girl have taken a long time to dig through what all was planted in me at that age. I remember I first felt this call to ministry. I was at Camp Cedarmore, just down the road from here. And I was, you know, this teenage girl, and I never considered that before, but really believe that that's kind of when I first began to hear that voice. I didn't know what that was going to look like for me, but I was excited about it and hopeful about it. And on one hand, my church was so affirming and encouraging and said, yes, you feel called to ministry. That's great. You can be a children's director or a pastor's wife or a missionary to China. Like these are your pathways for what that can look like for you. And I remember thinking, but I don't know that I really resonate with any of those things. I even remember asking a mentor of mine, why can't women be pastors? You know, I feel like I might be interested in some of the things that a pastor does. And she said, oh gosh, we are just too emotional for that. That is just not what God calls women to do. We could never handle all the funerals and the pastoral counseling. And granted, I didn't know anything different, you know. And looking back, I realized this makes me feel old, but you know, we didn't have our cell phones connected where we could just like Google things. All of that was still becoming very new. And so I only knew like this small town world that I was living in. And it wasn't until I got to college that the boxes I'd always put God in started to become unpacked. And I realized that this isn't as black and white as I've always thought. I remember the first time I heard a woman preach at chapel at Georgetown. I thought, well, she's disobeying God. That's not what God calls women to do. But she has some good things to say. And what do you do with that? And just really wrestling with that. I remember the first time I was asked to preach at a small Methodist church in Scott County. I was, you know, so active on campus and involved in campus ministries and different things. And one of our campus ministers said, hey, by the way, I'm going to be out of town in a few weeks. Would you preach for me? And my jaw just drops to the floor. I'm like, in the pulpit on a Sunday? Like, are you sure? And then he's surprised that I've never done that before. And so I remember really praying and wrestling with that decision. And I still remember driving out to this little church in Scott County and the sunrise that morning. And I still remember stepping into the pulpit and just feeling like I'd come alive and something had sparked within me. You know, it's just one of those moments when you feel like you've discovered at least part of what God might be calling and creating you to do, which was exciting and terrifying. So that led me to start looking at seminaries, and I wanted to go to a seminary where all my options would be open to me as a woman, and was looking around the Southeast, and that led me to Baylor and to Texas. And that was a big part of my story. And then Calvary as well. But it took me until my last semester of seminary on the first day of class. You know, it's always kind of awkward. The professor asks you to introduce yourself and to share something about you. And all of the men in class just always were so confident, assured of, my name's Joe and I feel called to be a pastor. And it would get to me and I would say, well, my name's Mary Alice and I love the church and I love speaking and I love caring for people and I love missions. And I would pretty much awkwardly list like all the things that a pastor does. I just couldn't say, my name's Mary Alice and I feel called to be a pastor. I needed to see it. And so I mentioned Julie Pennington Russell, who was the pastor in Waco, and I ended up going and doing my mentoring with her in Decatur, Georgia. And that was a really transformative experience for me. And it was after that semester that I thought, okay, I'm ready to take that next step. And I came back, and on that first day of the semester, I said, my name's Mary Alice, and I feel called to be a pastor.
That's a beautiful,
yeah.
I love that story. Can talk some more about people that have been weaved into your life. My sense is a lot of times when people tell their story, you can tell it around these kind of powerful, meaningful relationships, whether they be mentors or friends, or who are some people that your life has been weaved around?
Yeah, I love that question. Well, the first figure, and several of you knew him, was Jack Birdwhistell, my uncle, who was a professor at Georgetown. And it's pretty neat being back in Kentucky and meeting people who immediately knew Jack. He was a campus minister at Georgetown for many years, and then he became a New Testament professor. And so he was my professor at Georgetown. First day of class, I sit down, I'm trying to be incognito, like we don't need to tell everyone that we're related kind of thing. And he starts the class and he says, this is my niece, Mary Alice Birdwhistell, and she will be getting the Birdwhistell bonus. I'm like, okay, thanks for putting that out there. But he was just always such an incredible mentor and always asking me what I was reading and what I was learning, and just always helping me kind of unpack that box that I talked about before. And he was always sending books. The crazy thing is he passed away 6 years ago now, and pretty unexpectedly one day. And after he passed away, all these people start posting about him on Facebook. And someone said, I thought I was Jack's favorite.
Mm.
And then I realized all these people, and that's how he made people feel. But the beautiful thing, I've actually got a box with this over there on my bookshelves. He had reached out to me just a few days before he died, and he said, hey, I've got a book on its way to you. And when I got back from his memorial service, it was on my front doorstep.
Mm.
So I will just always save that package.
Mm.
So he was significant, and I feel like he is just cheering me on.
Yeah. Well, we give a deep bow to him.
Yeah.
Talk some. I like to parse some of these questions. One is the first one is more kind of, what do you love about pastoral ministry? I mean, or what do you love about your work, or what's something that really lights you up about that? And then I want to get into some of more of your kind of spirituality, your personal kind of connection with God and how that's nurtured. But what do you love about your work?
Yeah. You know what I love about my work is what we haven't had for the past year.
Right.
Oh, I love people. I love being part of people's lives and being invited into those sacred spaces, whether it's from the very first breaths to the very final breaths and everything in between. I love being invited into the normal everyday moments and the really messy moments that people don't know where to put or who they can talk to about them. Just what a gift it is to be invited into people's lives. A neat story, I actually wrote a poem about this a few years ago because it was just so profound. It was the same day. At first, I was called to go to someone's bedside because they were on hospice care, and they knew that it was probably just going to be maybe a few more days. And so I went and sat with this man and held his hand and am praying with him. And he had just been a significant figure in our church and had done a lot of important work in civil rights. And he was a retired pastor himself. He had given me so many books and just poured so much wisdom into me. And so to get to be with him in those final moments was so sacred. And he knew that I was there and just had this, sweet smile on his face. He couldn't talk, but just felt like God was so present and so real in that moment. And I'm walking out of the house and, a little emotional. And I looked down at my phone and a new baby was born in our congregation. And they said, would you come to the hospital? And I go from this final moments with someone to going to the hospital and holding a newborn baby. And just, the back-to-back moments, and both so sacred. And so I'm holding this newborn baby and wiping his head and, holding his hand, and God is so present and so real in that moment too. And I just thought, what a gift. Like, how many other professions are there where you are invited into these spaces? That's something that I will never grow weary of. And especially after COVID-19 makes me appreciate all the more.
Yeah. What I think kind of a different question around your own spirituality. How about some challenges that you've experienced theologically, or dark night of the souls, or how we talk about that in our journeys? Are there some moments there that you would share, in some of the challenges of a relationship with the mystery?
Yeah, absolutely. So another big part of my story, I actually have a bone disorder. I break my bones really easily, and I've broken over 30 bones. And most of them in childhood. And so it was just like this constant cycle of learning to walk again, getting stronger, getting my independence back, And then it would be something simple, like I was walking to Sunday school one day and two boys came running around the corner and just bumped into me, and I fell and broke both my legs.
Mm.
Or slipped in the bathroom and fell and broke a vertebrae in my back. Like, just it was really simple things. And so I think that forced me to ask some big theological questions at a young age. The problem of pain, why do bad things happen to good people? And as a kid, I'm like, I do all the right things. I go to Sunday school. I, really felt like I'm trying to be a good person. Why is God letting this happen to me? And what do you do with that? In fact, I still remember as a freshman at Georgetown in our kind of freshman writing class, I took on the problem of pain for my research paper. Like, I can research this, figure this all out in like a 10 to 12 page paper. Not so much, but I think I was a young person asking big questions. And so, I don't, still don't have answers to that, but I think what I did grow to experience was a God who is with us in our pain and with us in our suffering. And I think that is so much of my work as a pastor too. I think that has kind of enabled me to be with people in hard, messy spaces, to know that we're not alone in that. And even, we're in the season of Lent right now, preparing for Holy Week and Easter. And before you can get to hope and resurrection, you've got to go through Good Friday and realizing that we follow a God who suffers with us and alongside us. And we follow a God who had questions about that too. And Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Like, Jesus was asking these very same questions. And that has given me comfort over the years that we follow a God who knows what it's like and is willing to enter into messy spaces with us.
How about personal spiritual practice? Like, what sustains you?
Yeah.
What sustains you? What sustains you from the inside? I guess is one of the ways they phrase that.
Oh, I love being outside. Just connects me with God in a way that being inside the four walls of a building can't. And I'm so excited to live in such a beautiful place again. Like,
yeah, right.
This fall is just like dry and flat and brown, and but gosh, to have Cherokee Park right around the corner and the river, and my parents have a farm in Madison County where you can watch the sunrise from the front porch and watch the sunset from the back porch. And I just connect with God and nature in a really special way. And I'm always reminded of that, like this time of year after winter when the sun starts coming out again. And I just feel like I can breathe more deeply. And so I know getting outside is just important for my soul. What I actually discovered this morning is how important people are in my own spiritual life. I have a coach that I meet with pretty regularly through a program I'm in with Wake Forest Divinity School. And we've been just doing some personal reflection. I said, this just seems like a drier season in my own spiritual life, and I'd really like to nurture that. And he immediately said, well, how much of that do you think has to do with having just moved across the country and being in a new place and COVID and not being able to be with people? And I just was able to see, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, I experience God through people and through this community. And when you think about Jesus as the Word who became flesh, like took on flesh, like it's no wonder that I'm feeling that lack, because we are not with this flesh and blood community, and being in a new place. But I would imagine it's similar for you, that, you have this practice of interviewing people and hearing their stories and being part of their lives. And I just experience God through that in such a rich way. And so, being in community with people, sharing meals, sharing stories, I experienced God so much through that.
Yeah. How about when I was a Presbyterian pastor, I had these favorite both liturgical seasons and I had favorite liturgical worship moments. So
Ooh.
like, and one of the things I missed, now I'm not practicing Christianity necessarily, but I missed the prayers of awareness and confession.
Mm,
And passing of the peace. Like I've realized there are no places in our culture where we do that.
yeah.
So what are some of your favorite worship liturgical moments? And then do you have a favorite liturgical? This is probably like Reverend geek out question, but like
Right.
what's your favorite liturgical season and moment in worship?
I love Advent. Advent is these 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, and each week we light a candle on the Advent wreath, and it's this kind of season of waiting and anticipation and hopefulness, for Christ's coming. And it just always reminds me to stop and slow down and to pay attention. um Gosh, that if I were to name another spiritual practice, it's that. Mary Oliver is one of my favorite poets, and she always says, these are the instructions for living a life. She says in one of her poems: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it.
Mm.
And if I could summarize the spiritual life, I mean, pay attention to what God is doing around us in so many beautiful ways, big and small. Be astonished by it. Allow yourself to be just overcome by the wonder of it, and tell about it. And I think Advent brings that out in me. Advent forces me to slow down, to light the candle, to sit, to be present. And as someone who is often very fast paced and on the go, Advent is good for my soul in that. Worship moments. Let's see. I'm still getting that at Highland, because we haven't had worship face to face since I've been here. Okay, I can tell you about two moments though. One is a more specific and then one's more general. I'll tell you about a Highland moment first. So I've only experienced worship like preaching to this dot, like I'm speaking to the little dot on my computer right now, which is such a weird thing. And then it's even weird that that's becoming normal, right? That I don't know what worship in person at Highland is even like. All I know is what it is like for 12 or 15 people to be in the sanctuary, and we each walk up to the screen when it's our turn. But there was a particular moment, and it was during Advent. Our choir had put together a Zoom choir song. I want to walk as a child of peace. Maybe you may want to share it on the site.
Yeah.
And I sang with the choir, and so I'd practiced, I recorded it in my laundry room with my headphones, and you have to be just on point because you have to be recording for your computer and then you're listening on your phone. I mean, it was way more complicated than any of us realized, right? And it's the Sunday, Peace Sunday of Advent. And so we have it on this big screen, and we are playing it for the congregation for the first time in worship. And so we as ministers are seeing it for the first time. And we were just so overcome with emotion of what it was like to be in that sanctuary and to hear these voices from our community pouring over us, and to see their faces. And I thought, I've been at this church for months and I haven't heard what this choir sounds like. And all of a sudden they are singing over me. And it was just this gift of peace that we all didn't even know we needed that morning. It was just beautiful. And so sometimes I like the moments in worship like that are just totally unexpected. Like, we wanted to do it because we wanted to get the choir together and we wanted the church to hear from them. But we had no idea how meaningful it would be to see it come together after such a hard season. And as someone personally who experiences God through other people and their their voices and their stories, seeing their faces pop up was just a really overwhelming thing. Another practice is from Calvary. A few years, this was my very first time to baptize someone, and it was a little boy who had grown up in our children's ministry at Calvary and started coming through some backyard Bible clubs. And just, you're not supposed to have favorite kids, but he was just one of my favorites. His name was Ashari, and he would come hang out in my office on Wednesday afternoons and was just so excited to be baptized and to share that with the church. And his family didn't come with him to church. He came on his own, and Calvary kind of became his second family. And to experience that moment with him was so special. But what we did, we actually had so our baptistry was at the very front of the sanctuary, kind of on the stage. And it often you felt so far away from the congregation because you got the stage and then you go down and all the pews. And so we invited the whole congregation to come up and gather around the baptistry. And then we sang as I went down to the river to pray, and everyone coming up. We had the kids at the front so they could be right there by the glass and could see. And for Asharian to look out and to see the faces of his faith community was such a powerful thing. And just to feel connected in that moment and to be together in that moment, and for them to see him dipped under the water and to come back up and the water splash off of his face and the big grin he had. And it was so profound that immediately people said, "Is this the new way we are going to do baptism at Calvary?" And at first we're like, we were just trying something different. And they're like, "No, I want that at my baptism."
Yeah,
So it
right.
became a new tradition because it was so powerful. We could not do it.
I love that. Beautiful story. Yeah, thanks for sharing that one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open it up here after this question. If any of you that are on Zoom, we got a great group on Zoom. If y'all have a question for Mary Alice, feel free to unmute yourself after this question. Mary Alice, talk some about both a theological charisma of Baptists that you like, and then something that really is challenging to you in Baptist thought and theology. Yeah, what's something that you really appreciated about that tradition, and then what's something you struggle with?
Yeah. Well, and my answer is probably the same thing, that both what I appreciate and what I struggle with. I so appreciate that in Baptist life, we take seriously what we call the priesthood of the believer, that everyone has their own relationship with God. And so within the church, everyone has a vote, everyone has a voice. There is no one person that is any more important or any more connected to God than any other person. And it is this beautiful thing that I think we see lived out in so many ways, that I can learn so much from God from Asharian as Asharian can learn from me. And so I think theologically, I love that. You just see the diversity of the kingdom of God through all of these different voices and all of these different people. The challenge is that it means church gets messy. Because there are so many different opinions and voices and perspectives, that oftentimes it's hard to move forward when you can't get a consensus, or it just means that it takes a long time to move forward. I find as a pastor, if you move too quickly, you look around and realize nobody's coming with you. But if you don't move enough, you realize everybody's kind of getting stagnant. And so you've got to find that healthy balance. But it's hard sometimes when there's diversity on theological issues, and you want the church to move forward in something, and you've got a lot of different opinions there. How do you reconcile that? And that is a challenge for a lot of Baptist churches, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to open it up. Are there any questions that those of you that are on Zoom have? feel free to just unmute yourself and ask the question. This is an open conversation. I've been selfish so far. Those are all my questions. Do any of y'all have a question or a comment? A lot of you all already know and love Mary Alice from Highland. Any questions or comments? I have another question. If not, so you all can. If you have a question, feel free to jump in. Mary Alice, what do you think the role of the church is in society today? You know, as we look at the changing demographics around the world with religious participation, there's kind of an identity crisis, maybe even that's been perpetuated by people no longer being able to meet in community face to face. What's
Right.
what role does the church have in the world today?
That's a really good question. My hope is that the church can still be a place where people can go to hear good news. In a world that, just think about what's actually been on the news the past year in Louisville and around the world, from Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, COVID-19, Trump, election. Even here in Louisville, that it was we had the most homicides in the city. I think that it was a record-breaking number. I mean, when you are surrounded by so much, like, people need a word of hope. People need good news. And I think that's what keeps me going and keeps me doing the work that I do, is that I believe that God brings us a word of hope, even in the midst of despair. And going back to that incarnation theology of God with us, I believe that even in the midst of all this crazy stuff going on, that the church can't or shouldn't be ignoring it or pretending like the things of this world don't matter. But I believe that we've got to be working toward God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, here and now. And so it's both a place where we can come to hear the good news, but then also we've got to turn around and help to bring that good news to our community and world. It's a both and. It's this got to be a place of inward formation, but then it turns us outwardly to do a work of transformation in our world.
Yeah.
That's my hope for the church.
Yeah, well, may it be so. Are there any questions from any of the panelists or any of the folks that are on the Zoom? You're welcome to ask. One of the questions IPP is kind of famous for asking is, what's your recipe for peace? We do a yearly fundraiser where we invite people in to share their recipe for peace. So what would you say is your recipe for peace? And you can describe peace however that comes to you.
What is my recipe for peace? That's such a great question. Gosh, I mean, it starts with relationships. Brene Brown says that people are hard to hate close up, and you've got to move in, get closer, see what's beneath the surface. And so I think relationships at least need to be a big part of the recipe. And the reality is that the vast majority of us have relationships with people who look like us and think like us and believe like us and act like us. which is why the work that you are doing is so important, that we've got to be in relationship with people who are different from us, and instead of shying away from that, to get curious about that and say, tell me more. That, I don't know if you listen to Kelly Corrigan's podcast, but that's one of her big sayings is when something makes her uncomfortable, or you know, she's not sure about something, her inclination is to shy away from it or to challenge it. And so she's started this practice of saying, I'm curious, tell me more, you know, what's going on there? What's beneath the surface there? And then I think justice work has to be part of that as well, that you've got the work of relationships, and then you've got to have the work of advocacy and justice, of working for accountability, that you can't have love without accountability. And so helping to right the wrongs within our system, sometimes that takes more than relationships. That takes changes in policies and reallocating resources. And so maybe it's relationships plus justice. I'm sure there are lots of other important things in that recipe, but those are two big pieces at least.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Are there any, again, any questions anybody wants to ask from the Zoom group? Well, a couple of things as we begin to close. One is I do want to say welcome on behalf of Louisville and the interfaith community. Highland has been such a powerful community in our city. What a beautiful place for you to be, and to offer those gifts to really amazing people. When you trace back a lot of really beautiful things that have happened in Louisville, their Highland members are often connected to that. And so it has been a formative powerhouse in goodness and compassion and justice in Louisville. And so really excited to have you there, and to all of the members of Highland. We say well done in them choosing you to be a pastor, and also a blessing to you in this work of being a woman in ministry. And thank you for the courage and the journey of that, and modeling that for all of us, for men and women, in the realities of who we can be, and what we're called to. So thank you, and welcome to the city.
Thank you.
Are there any final words or things that you would say to Louisville or to our community about yourself, about your journey, or anything?
I think we've got Leela may have a question for us.
Okay. Leela, welcome. You can unmute yourself there and ask your question. And this is my mom, Leela. Welcome, Mom. Mom's been on a lot of our programs. It's always kind of embarrassing saying, 3 people on the program, and one of them's my mom. But Mom, you're still on mute there. There you go.
I would like to express an appreciation to you, Mary Alice. And that would be related to the role that you accepted as being a woman in ministry. And a little bit of a question with that, maybe a short answer one. In 1983, when the Baptist Women in Ministry group met here in Louisville, there were a number of women who were preparing for ministry, but not pastoral. They wanted to be, but there were no openings. And so the journey has been a long one, and there were many people who were against what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
And that has changed a little bit, but the 6.5 number that you gave about openings that are made in congregations for a woman are few, and we have more women who are prepared. I wonder if you would just have a thought about how we can more appreciate the women who are looking for a place in our city to be a part of the activities that are going on citywide and maybe churchwide too. How do you call us out to be a part of the journey that you'll be taking as pastor?
Oh, that's such a great question, Leela. I love it. Yeah, I think it's easy for us to get in our little silos and to think, well, Highland has a female pastor. We've got all kinds of female pastors on staff. Problem solved. But the reality is it's not. And there are so many churches who are not there. And there are so many women who need a place. I think so much of it goes back to looking around and seeing when women or other voices are marginalized and seeing what we could do to bring other voices to the table. The story I like to tell with this, Mark Zuckerberg, who's the creator of Facebook, came to Waco a few years ago, and which is so random, right? But he was doing a tour of Texas and coming to all these different Texas towns to learn about their culture and their cities. And he asked to speak with some local leaders in Waco. And there was a picture of him in the Waco newspaper the next day, and popped up on Facebook. And I was so excited because there's Mark Zuckerberg, and he's at this little cafe that is like a block and a half away from Calvary. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's Mark Zuckerberg at the World Cup Cafe. How cool is that? And then I zoom in a little closer and I see that he is meeting with pastors. And so whoever organized the meeting said, why don't we get a group of local pastors to come share about Waco with Mark Zuckerberg? And I thought, oh my gosh, I know so-and-so and I know so-and-so, and that's so cool. And then my jaw drops because there's not a single woman at the table. And I thought, okay, one, who organized this meeting? And two, who didn't notice that there wasn't a woman at the table? And what does Mark Zuckerberg think about this? And in fact, is it Sheryl Sandberg, who is his CFO maybe, who has written all kinds of things about women leaning in and having a seat at the table? I'm like, this is a perfect example. And so I just encourage everyone in whatever sphere of influence or leadership you are in to look around and say, okay, who's not at this table? And how can I invite them in? What would that look like for me? The other thing I say is that sometimes I think men can advocate for and alongside women in a different way than we can advocate for ourselves. And I think that goes true for anyone who has a place of privilege, that we can do some advocacy work for those who don't have privilege in that moment. I remember being at a Baptist conference in Atlanta one year, and oftentimes it just kind of feels like it's the good old boys club. I was walking through the hotel lobby one night. I see a friend from college, and he's standing around the circle with another group of men. And I just kind of waved to him like, oh, hey, and I'm going to get up on the elevator, and he calls me over. He says, hey, Mary Alice, come over here. I want to introduce you to these people. So he invites me into the circle. And I think one, he sees, oh, there's not let's give Mary Alice a seat at the table here. But then two, this is what he says, and he says it in a self-deprecating way. But I think he knew he had to say something to get their attention. He says, hey, all, this is my friend Mary Alice. I went to college with her. And he said, I don't care if I have to take out the garbage at her church. I want to work at her church one day. And all of a sudden, every single person is handing me a business card saying, hey, I know of this church. I know of this opportunity. Can you call me? Let's get connected. And here's the thing. Chris is an incredible pastor. Like, I would love to serve alongside him in ministry one day. But like, he knew he needed to say something almost outlandish to get their attention and to invite me into the circle as a young woman in ministry who at that time didn't have much experience or the connections that he had. And so I think we can all do that when we are in a place of privilege, to say, how can we bring other people to the table? It's a good lesson for all of us.
Great question. Great response. Thank you. Yeah, may it be so. Well, I do want to, unless there's another question from anybody that's on the, yes, Sue, you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
I would just like to say, as a recovering Southern Baptist, how refreshing this conversation has been and how much I appreciate seeing a woman in the ministry.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Sue.
So great to meet you.
Yeah. Well, Mary Alice, thoughts and blessings to you and the wonderful work at Highland. And I know that reimagining what is pastoral ministry in the time of COVID for all of our religious clergy has really been difficult and challenging. Thanks for all the creativity that's coming out of Highland and how to do that. Is there any talk on when churches or congregations may go back to seeing each other face to face?
That is the big question. There are still not easy answers. I actually just met with our COVID advisory team of some of our doctors and healthcare folks last night. Right now, we are really hoping to start doing some more outdoor activities as ways to gather as the weather gets warmer and get people together. One of the things we said was, what if we prioritize people over place? That people is really what we miss, and how can we connect people? So that is definitely something that is on our radar in the days ahead. You know, everyone just dearly misses being together in worship, and are trying to get back to that as soon as we can.
Yeah. Well, blessings to you all in that journey, and to all of us in giving grace and peace to our religious clergy and pastors around our city. Well, thank you all. Thanks for joining today. And Mary Alice, really look forward to your work in our city and community. And you're at an amazing place with amazing people. And we'll look forward to collaborating on continuing to help Louisville be a compassionate, engaged, and loving city. Thanks for a little time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Judd. I love being part of the conversation with you. I'm looking forward to lunch.
Yes, we'll do it. Thank you all that have joined us on Zoom, and those of you that are joining us on Facebook. Thanks for being present. Again, every Wednesday at noon, we do an interview with a different religious leader or spiritual leader in our community. So put it on your calendar and come back to join us. I also want to remind you all that on Tuesday, March 9th, we have our first Reckoning Forum, which is an opportunity to support several Louisvillians that are doing innovative work around violence reduction. That's next Tuesday at 6 o'clock on IPP. If you're interested, you do need to sign up for that. And I believe we only have a few spaces left. We've filled up, and it's going to be a great forum to hear about violence reduction and support some innovators in our city. So look on IPP's webpage for that, and come back and join us again. Thanks, Mary Alice. Peace be with you and the rest of you all on Zoom. Thanks for being here.
Also with you. Thanks, Judd.
Peace.